It is a first down. Pirates.
You can paint this one purple. What an incredible win by the ECU Pirates.
Welcome into Blackbeard's Alley, a Pirate Football podcast. We appreciate everyone tuning in. Episode 45, we continue our opponent previews. We're down to the Memphis Tigers and UAB Blazers. And this afternoon, joining me from the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, very excited to be talking some Tigers football with Jonah Dillon. Jonah, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, excited to be here. Excited that we're almost there. It's almost time for college football.
Yeah, no doubt. Less than 3 weeks. And in the case of the Tigers, even less time because they're, of course, taking part in week 0 and traveling out to Las Vegas. The UNLV Running Rebels and Dan Mullen's club await. So that's part of a very, very intriguing non-conference schedule that also includes at Boise State. But obviously, a coaching change during the offseason. Ryan Silverfield electing to move on to Arkansas after having beaten the Razorbacks, a season ago. So all in all, definitely a successful time there in Memphis for Coach Silverfield. Now Charles Huff coming in, his third coaching job in as many seasons.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ryan Silverfield obviously won a lot of games at Memphis, but if you're around Memphis fans, they wanted to see their team get to the conference title game, and they haven't done that since 2019 when Mike Norvell left for Florida State. And so that's been kind of the storyline around Memphis the past couple of years, is trying to get over that hump and get to the conference title game. So Charles Huff comes in as a new coach, and expectations are really high right off the jump, right? Because he came in and he made no secret of his expectations and his goals, which is to get to that conference title game. And so they're trying to do that at the same time as kind of integrating a whole new coaching staff, a whole new roster. This is a team that's made up almost entirely of transfers. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes, especially with those difficult non-conference games to start off, right? At UNLV, at Boise State are two really tough games. And I think that'll tell us a lot about this team.
Yeah, a little as far as Coach Huff, of course, a very successful tenure there at Marshall, capped by that Sun Belt Conference title in 2024, elected to move on to Southern Miss. I think when he went to the Golden Eagles, maybe at least 30 or 35 Thundering Herd players followed him. But according to what I'm reading, about 12 Southern Miss players have come to Memphis?
Yeah, and a lot of really key players too, especially on defense. I mean, you're talking about guys on defense, all Sun Belt players who were capable of playing at the Power 4 level and who decided not to go to Power 4 teams and decided to come to Memphis. Mike Montgomery, a linebacker, Jamon Tapp on the defensive line, who might be the best defensive player in this conference period. And then Ian Foster in the secondary. Those guys are all Sun Belt guys a year ago at Southern Miss. They're all capable of playing at a really high level. And so the fact that they came to Memphis is a big deal. And I think it means that Memphis's defense has a really high floor in 2026 because the talent level is 100% there.
I got you back now. Last thing that I heard, you were saying something about Sun Belt, and then we dropped.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. I was saying basically.
I think it was on my end. No big deal.
Okay. Do you want me to just go repeat it again?
Sure.
Okay. I was saying you got those guys on defense: Jamon Tapp, Mike Montgomery, Ian Foster, all Sun Belt guys a year ago at Southern Miss. They came to Memphis. And I would expect them to be among the best defensive players in the conference period. And so Memphis's defense, I think, is in a really good place going into 2026.
Before we dive any deeper into the personnel and talk about some of those guys specifically, tell us a little about the coaching staff. Kevin Decker, the offensive coordinator, coming over from Old Dominion. Very successful season for the Monarchs with 10 wins and ranking 14th nationally in total offense. And then Lance Guidry, a guy that Coach Huff had a familiarity with from his time at Marshall before he had moved on. And then last year he served as an LSU defensive analyst.
Yeah, Lance Guidry kind of helped when Charles Huff was at Marshall. They had this 4-2-5 system that they worked together. Lance Guidry leaves, and Jason Seymour comes in for the end of Charles Huff's run at Marshall. And then at Southern Miss, kind of fine-tuned the 4-2-5 system that they're using. When Charles Huff got hired at Memphis, he brought Jason Seymour with him originally. Jason Seymour showed up at Memphis, and after, I think, 2 weeks, Georgia Tech hired him. So he leaves, one of those situations where a new assistant comes in and then leaves really quickly. That's also exactly what happened to Lance Guidry. He had gone to Oregon State to work with Jamarcus Shepard. And after Jason Seymour left, got a call from Charles Huff, comes to Memphis to kind of run a similar system again to the one that he had been running at Marshall. On the other side of the ball, Kevin Decker is a really interesting hire at offensive coordinator, really exciting young coach. We know what he did at ODU, really quick offense. He runs that sort of Josh Heupel, Alex Golesh-esque offense, which is going to be different for Memphis this year. I know ECU fans have seen that right firsthand, especially what they were doing last year, one of the fastest offenses in the country. But that's what's going to be in Memphis this year. It's really interesting, a lot of roster turnover and obviously a new quarterback. But that the offense and the way it looks is going to be a huge storyline, I think, over the first couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, in the last couple of days, I heard Coach Huff addressing the quarterback situation as I was scrolling social media, and he went on to say, he said, I understand you guys have to ask. I'm not going. I think it was you specifically had asked that question. He said, I understand you're just doing your job, but I made this promise to these quarterbacks that it would be announced on such and such date, and so. What light can you shed? You have Aaron Nolan, coming over from, I guess, South Carolina. He had also been at Ohio State, and then also Marcus Stokes from West Florida, a name that I certainly heard when he was in the transfer portal, and then also a quarterback, Denzel Gardner from Southern Miss.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Marcus Stokes and Aaron Nolan, both well-known, both former four-star recruits. Marcus Stokes has played a lot of football. He was one of the best players in Division II last year when he was at West Florida. And Aaron Nolan has been at Ohio State. He's been in South Carolina, but he hasn't played a lot. And so I think that always gave Marcus Stokes sort of an advantage coming into the competition just because he has that legitimate experience. And it's a cliche, but you can't teach experience, right? Especially when it comes to the quarterback position. There hasn't been a lot that's come out about it. And you saw that clip. Charles Huff has said that throughout the offseason. And he's also basically said, he wants to wait until they run out on the field against UNLV to announce who the quarterback is. A lot of these quarterback competitions are kind of like that, even at ECU, I think, as well, right? Like where everybody who's around the program sort of has an idea of what's happening. That obviously doesn't mean that guy's going to win it. There's all the time examples of somebody being an underdog in a quarterback competition and winning it. Thinking about Jerry Mensa a couple of years ago at Tulane. Nobody expected him to win that competition going in. But as I look around this conference, you can have a pretty good idea, I think, in most situations of at least who has the advantage going into a competition. And that just means that the other person has to do more to sort of overcome that throughout the training camp and throughout the offseason.
If you would, tell us a little about the personnel that either, Nolan, Stokes, or Gardner will have around them. I noticed you have a running back coming over from Southern Miss, is also Colorado Buffalo's running back, and then at wide receiver, guys like Chapman, Timmons, and Tipton.
Yeah, I think running back can be really interesting. I'm interested to see what the split looks like among, I think there's going to be three guys who are going to get consistent playing time. Jalen Carter, who came from Southern Miss, Dallin Hayden, who came from Colorado, was also at Ohio State before that and is a Memphis native. And then Manny Covey, who came from Cincinnati. All three guys sort of have different styles of play, so I think that they'll need all of them. And Jalen Carter is someone who maybe hasn't gotten talked about as much as those two guys because obviously he's coming from Southern Miss, not a power conference school like the other guys, but is someone who I think they're really high on and could play really well this year and sort of be a breakout candidate for this team. So that's another thing, the first couple of games, even just the first game, who gets the most carries, who's on the field the most, and in what ways are they using guys? I think Manny Covey has the potential to be a dynamic punt returner. We saw that at Cincinnati, and guys who can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. Receiver is a pretty big question mark in terms of the split of who's going to play. Tyshawn Chapman, sort of the one guy you can say definitively based on what he's done with Charles Huff in the past at Marshall and at Southern Miss. There's a lot of talent in that room. There's a lot of speed in that room. That's something that they emphasized throughout the offseason. But there's also a lot of guys in that room. There might be 7 or 8 guys that I think could play. And we're going to have to see what that looks like the first couple weeks of the season, who's able to be consistent and kind of force themselves onto the field.
I know you have at least a piece or two returning on the offensive line, but what can you tell us there? And then we'll shift over and talk about the defense.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is going to be solid. Obviously, you need to stay healthy and you need to find a group that works and a combination that works because chemistry is so important when it comes to that. There's starters. There's players who have started at multiple places on this offensive line, which again, you talk about experience, especially in the offensive line. It's a huge advantage. Martin Wisma coming from Old Dominion, Riley McGee coming from Arkansas State, like guys like that who have played a lot, Aaron Karras. And so I think you're going to see a pretty cohesive offensive line to start the season. Again, they got to get the combinations right. Position battles have been going on the interior throughout training camp and throughout the summer. But I think that group could be really solid. I think when you see these teams in this conference, something we've seen from South Florida the past couple of years, when you have money in this conference, the most effective way and the way it shows up the most a lot of times is in the trenches. You saw what South Florida did last year, just kind of moving people around in the trenches. They went to Florida and just moved people around in the trenches, right? Because they invested in their lines. And so I think you're going to see that at Memphis this year. They've started to take that seriously. And I think that they're going to be good on both sides of the ball in the trenches.
Yeah, to your point, East Carolina can certainly relate as the Pirates lost offensive linemen to South Carolina. And then also another to a quote P4 program, but I guess such is life in this era of college football, and I think the Pirates have done a pretty good job of replacing those guys with acquisitions from the portal. One of which, Hayes Creel, came from Southern Miss. But as you take a look at things on the defensive side last year, and obviously a lot of variables go into it, but the Tigers weren't very good in the first half of games and then extremely good in the second half of games. But tell us a little about the personnel that Lance Guidry is going to have at his disposal.
Yeah, well, I think those guys from Southern Miss, it's huge. You're talking about proven starters at the group of six level. Amir Foster, another one in the secondary, who's going to play a lot, and it's going to be really important to this team. I think they feel really good about the defensive line, not just the top guys, but about the rotation they have there. And again, the trenches are so important, especially when you get later in the season. I mentioned Tapp. He's a candidate to be player of the year in this conference, and I think could really surprise a lot of people with how he plays this year against this level of competition. There's been position battles at cornerback and at linebacker next to Mike Montgomery. Those are going to be interesting to see how that works out, because there are still a lot of spots, that going into the spring and even after that were up for grabs. And so the question is how those guys integrate with everybody else that we know is going to start. But I think that this group has the potential to be really good. I think the floor is high for this defense. The question is, if they have injuries or if those position battles aren't sorted right away, how is it going to look when we get a couple weeks in the season?
And then on the special team side, what is Coach Huff bringing in? Does anything return? What light can you shed there? Punter, kicker, and then also in the return aspect? Yeah,
it's been different. We got basically new players coming in at every position there. There's some position battles going on. It'll be really interesting to see when we get to the season. You see guys who have maybe been backup kickers or punters somewhere else. How are they going to play when they get here? The return game is going to be really interesting. I mentioned Manny Covey with punt returns. Kick return wise, Ian Foster returned kicks at Marshall a couple years ago. He was one of the best kick returners in the country. The question with Ian Foster is how much do you want to use him, because he's so dynamic and so important defensively. He has the potential, again, to be one of the best kick returners in the country, I think, without a doubt. Alante Brown is another guy who I think could be dynamic on kick returns. So if they do get opportunities to return kicks, this is a situation where I wouldn't be shocked at all if somebody returned one for a touchdown. And then on punt returns, I think Manny Covey is going to be a weapon as well. And so there is potential for the return game to be really good this year.
Lastly, let's take a look at this schedule I referenced and the season opener at UNLV on August the 29th. Then you have Arkansas State there at the Liberty Bowl, the newly renovated Liberty Bowl. Folks that have played there, and be it East Carolina or otherwise, have noticed those renovations taking place over the last year or two. I know Memphis is glad to open up that facility, and I'll talk more about that momentarily. But at Boise State in Game 3, then you have UT Martin, FCS opponent within the league. You go to Charlotte, and then you have 4 weeknight games at Tulane, ECU at home on a Thursday, at South Florida on a Thursday, and then on Thanksgiving weekend, I believe you also play Temple on a Friday. So your thoughts about the Tigers' schedule and draw within the conference?
Yeah, it's a tough schedule in the conference. I think pretty clearly you look at the top projected teams in the conference. Memphis has to play 5 of the top 7, not including themselves. South Florida has to play 5 as well. Nobody else has to play that many. And especially those 5 games come back to back to back with a bye week in there. So the middle of the schedule is really all the teams that you would expect to be among the top teams in the conference. And most of them, aside from ECU and Army, are going to be on the road. And so having to go to Navy, having to go to South Florida, potentially Tulane, that's where the season is going to be decided. And so having to play those games on the road and also having to obviously play Boise State and UNLV on the road, it's going to be a big storyline throughout the year of can Memphis put on the road? Can they play at the same level? Because it's going to be so important this year. It'll be interesting. The first 2 games of the season in conference, again, Charlotte and UAB, expected to be the bottom 2 teams in the conference. But any Memphis fan knows Memphis has had major problems with those teams over the past couple of years. Lost to UAB last year, and then 2 years ago and 3 years ago played basically life or death with Charlotte a couple times. And so you would expect those to be games where Memphis can kind of ease into the schedule. But once we get to college football, you never know what's going to happen. And who knows, they might win those games easily. They might be difficult. And then we'll see once they get into those more difficult opponents in the middle of the season.
Lastly, if you would tell folks who are not familiar as far as the stadium expansion or renovations, I say expansion, it's really more renovations because I guess capacity is really being reduced. And just from afar, seeing pictures and video, it looks very similar to what Florida State's doing with Doak Campbell Stadium.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not even an expansion; it's a reduction. In a lot of ways, there was too many seats. Basically, I think ultimately the story for the last 2 years has been this has been in progress, right? Like a couple of years ago, there was an entire side of the stadium that was just missing during the games, and it looked pretty weird. They've obviously made progress. It's supposed to reopen before that Arkansas State game. They've completely rebuilt one side of the stadium, so it will look a little bit strange. They've done other things throughout the whole stadium to make it so that everybody who's there kind of sees the renovations, new scoreboards, sound systems, stuff like that. And I think it's giving them a lot of confidence because this is a project, and renovating the stadium is something that people have talked about for years and years at Memphis. So they've finally gotten to that point where they've done it, and it's going to reopen, and now they can kind of move forward. And so that'll be a thing. I think once they get through that Arkansas State game, the first week of the season, people will be excited that they've kind of reached that point, and now they can move forward with this new stadium, moving forward with the season, this team, and this program.
Appreciate the time. Enjoyed having you on the show for the initial conversation, but look forward to having you back. I guess late October when the Pirates and Tigers get together on that Thursday night. We'll aim to have you on then. Tell folks how they can read your work, and then anything else you would like to plug.
Yeah, you can follow me on X at the Jonah Dillon, commercialappeal.com for all my stuff. And I'm looking forward to that game. I think it's going to be a fun one. Yeah,
East Carolina and Memphis have played some tremendous games down through the years. On the triple overtime game, I think it was 3 or 4 overtimes back in 2022. And then, of course, last season was an absolute thriller at Dowdy-Ficklin. But Pirate Nation, that is Jonah Dillon of the Commercial Appeal in Memphis. We'll talk to you soon. And as always, go Pirates.
Painted purple all night long in Eastern North Carolina.